beginning of the fight starts off with a few autos. The main tank should make sure to center Thancred as best as possible to make the upcoming mechanic comfier. Fatebreaker will begin casting Cyclonic Break. As he casts this, he will either be surrounded by fire or lightning. These have different effects when the cast goes off. On the cast, all players will be hit with thin proteans. These proteans will repeat themselves, and at the same time, all players will either be hit with 2 player stacks if it is fire, or spreads if it is lightning. Supports will rotate counterclockwise, and DPS will rotate clockwise. For fire, we stack in our pairs like so. For lightning, the ranged DPS and healers will be further from the boss to not clip their melees. After the spreads or stacks go off, the proteans will begin rotating to fill the spaces in between. Dodge these carefully, as misplaced proteans can easily clip you. As the proteans finish repeating, the boss will begin casting Powder Mark Trail, a very hard-hitting tank buster which applies a debuff of the same name. When this debuff expires, it does a large AoE tank buster on the debuff holder and the closest player to them. Shortly after, Fatebreaker will begin casting Utopian Sky, channeling either fire or lightning once more before jumping away and shrouding the arena in fog. Shortly after the boss disappears, the Powder Mark Trail debuff will fall off. Because of this, we have the off-tank swap clock spots with the R2 player. Meanwhile, everybody else will head to their clock spot at the wall as clones of Fatebreaker appear, visible only to those who are near them. 3 of the clones at the wall will raise their sword. This indicates that they are preparing a line cleave through the middle of the arena. Since nobody else can see your Fatebreaker clone, if your clone has a sword raised, you'll head middle to signal that your clone is cleaving. If your clone is not cleaving, you will stay at the wall unless the person across from you moves in. 2 players should be staying at the wall. These players indicate the safe spots that the party will stay in. For the 2 safe spots, we will resolve the next mechanic in our light parties. So Group 1 will prioritize going to the red and purple waymarks, and Group 2 will prioritize the blue and yellow waymarks. If Fatebreaker casts lightning, the healer will be at the wall directly on the star, the tank will be in front of the healer, and the DPS will be on the left and right, about 3.5 notches from the star. If Fatebreaker casts fire on the Utopian Sky cast bar, all players will stack up in the safe corner. After these go off, everyone will group back up at their clock spots preparing for another Cyclonic Break. This is the exact same as the first one, except in downtime. As Cyclonic Break is resolving, 2 clones of Fatebreaker will spawn, one on the west wall and one slightly north of the center. The one at the wall will always cast a lightning-imbued Burnt Strike, which cleaves the middle of the arena with a small line AoE before expanding into a larger one. To resolve this, we dodge to end up north and south while avoiding the remaining Protean AoEs from Cyclonic Break. The clone slightly north will begin casting Turn of the Heavens, which can be imbued by either fire or lightning. This spawns 8 rings all around the arena, 4 being fire and 4 being lightning. The imbued element will make the rings of that color expand to be a larger AoE. Another clone of Fatebreaker will appear at the wall north and begin casting Burnt Strike, this time always being imbued with fire. This does a line cleave and then a knockback. At the same time, 2 clones will appear southeast and southwest, which tether onto 2 random players. This tether will soon lock the player in place and release a party stack that requires 4 players in it, including the tethered player. After the west ad does its cleave, the party will begin heading to the side with rings of the opposite color of the imbued cast bar. From here, we split into our role groups, with support staying on the north side and DPS staying on the south side. The players tethered will be fixed to have the player with the closest Fatebreaker clone to the safe side planting on the south group, and the player with the furthest Fatebreaker clone from the safe side planting on the north group. If 2 people of the same role are tethered, the person designated as flex for the other role will head to the opposite stack. It is standard for M1 to flex for 2 supports tethered, and MT to flex for 2 DPS tethered. The party will stay on the edge of the line cleave from north, and after it goes off, move into the center to be knocked back into the safe spots away from the ring AoEs. Make sure to end up in your proper stack positions to resolve the tethered player's stack. Should you take a stack with less than 4 players in it, all players will be granted Mark of Mortality, a debuff that reduces your damage by 90% and will grant a doom upon reaching 2 stacks of it. After the stacks go off, Fatebreaker will reappear in the middle of the room before casting British Glory. This is a raid-wide with a very hard-hitting dot, so mitigate and heal as necessary. For the upcoming mechanic, it is recommended for the party to arrange themselves in the conga line shown. After a few autos, Fatebreaker will begin casting Fall of Faith, imbuing himself in either fire or lightning, and tethering a random player. 3 more clones appear northwest, north, and northeast in sequence, all tethering random players in order just like Fatebreaker. These tethers will all go off in order. The tethered player will be lifted into the air and struck, shooting out either a stack cone on the closest player if it is fire, requiring 3 other players in the cone to survive, or will shoot out 3 spread cones on the 3 closest players if it is lightning. Failing to have enough players in the fire stack will result in being granted the Mark of Mortality debuff. To resolve this, the players tethered in order of 1 to 4 will move to have 1 and 3 be on west, and 2 and 4 being on east. From the remaining 4 players in the conga, their position in the conga will determine where they go to. The outermost west player will head to the west side, sitting on the north side to bait lightning if it is a spread. The inner west player will head to sit on the south side to bait lightning. The outermost east player will head to the north side on east, and the inner east player will head to the south side to bait on east. The 3 and 4 tether players will sit pointing outward on their respective west and east sides for spreads. To resolve fire tethers, all the players on their sides will simply group up toward the west or east side. As the tethers go off, players will have to move to resolve each debuff properly. You can either look at the clone on the outside of the arena to remember what element it is, or look at the color of the tether. After the first tether resolves, they will swap their spot with the third tether, with the same happening with the second tether swapping with the fourth tether. After the last tether, Fatebreaker will cast Burnish Glory once more. This hits as hard as the last one, so make sure to mitigate and heal properly. Fatebreaker will then cast Powder Mark Trail again, and after the Tank Buster, will cast Burn Strike, the Line Cleave which can be fire or lightning, and spawn 3 towers on either the east or west side. Each tower can require from 1 to 4 players to soak them, but can only total up to 6 required in each of them. To resolve this, we have H1 soak the northmost tower, R2 will soak the middle tower, and H2 will soak the southmost tower. The remaining soaks will be done by the melees and R1, who enter the towers in the order of M1, M2, and R1 from north to south. For the tanks, they will be on the opposite side of the boss, as they will have to resolve Powder Mark Trail at the same time as the towers go off. MT will sit on the north side, and OT will sit on the south side. If the Burnt Strike cast is imbued with fire, the party will line up just outside the boss hitbox to be knocked back into their spots. If the cast is lightning, everyone will instead stay out of the middle to soak their towers. After the Buster, there will be a few autos before Fatebreaker begins casting a final Burnish Glory, which acts as the Enrage and will wipe the party if he is not killed.
Phase 2 begins with Shiva casting Quadruple Slap. This is a 2-hit tank buster that leaves a cleansable physical vuln-up on the tank. It is standard for this buster to be taken with tank invulns. Shiva will auto a few times before preparing to cast Diamond Dust. This is a hard-hitting raid-wide that causes Shiva to become untargetable, beginning the first mechanic of the phase. All players should start off at their designated clock spots. Diamond Dust begins by giving all the supports, or all of the DPS, an AoE telegraph above their heads. At the same time, 2 large Shiva AoEs will appear on the floor, opposite of each other. These AoEs will appear at a random set of cardinals or intercardinals. During all of this, Shiva will be casting either Axe Kick, a large point-blank AoE, or Scythe Kick, a small donut AoE. You can tell which one she is casting based on her voice line. She will cleave with an axe, or she will reap with a scythe. When the Axe Kick or Scythe Kick AoEs go off, 4 proximity-baited Proteans will go off at the same time. These give a vuln-up that will kill any player that also has an AoE. In order to resolve the mechanic, we must ensure that the roll without the AoE telegraphs are the closest to the boss in order to bait the Proteans. These Proteans and AoEs can be solved using our clock spots, but due to the large Shiva AoEs on the ground, we have to set ourselves up so that the AoE players won't end up standing on top of them. To fix this issue, we watch where the first Shiva AoEs spawn. If they show up on the same cardinals or intercardinals as the roll with the AoE telegraphs, all players simply swap with their color partner. Now that we've got everyone in the correct clock spots, it's time to resolve the boss AoE. If she says reap, all players will gather underneath her, with the Protean baiters being closer than the AoE players. You can use the markings on the floor in order to see exactly where you're able to stand. After the donut AoE goes off, the AoE players will move out to the inner circle of the arena and place their AoE. If she says cleave, all players will head out past the outermost circle on the ground. Protean baiters will sit just beyond the circle, and AoE players will sit at the wall. Protean baiters will immediately head middle as soon as the cast bar snapshots. The AoE players will stay at the wall until their AoE is placed. The AoEs dropped by players will spawn Starburst AoEs, which are 8 lines radiating outward from their center. After the AoEs are placed, everyone must gather middle to prepare for a knockback coming from the center of the arena. We take this knockback in our light parties, and get knocked into the cardinal or intercardinal spots that were hit with the first Shiva AoEs. Group 1 will prioritize the red and purple waymarks, while Group 2 will prioritize the blue and yellow waymarks. While waiting to be knocked back, players should take note of the position of Oracle Reen, as she will be at a random cardinal or intercardinal on the side of the arena. Everyone will get knocked back, the Starburst AoEs will go off, and Oracle Reen will begin casting Sinbound Holy, a multi-hit stack on both healers that leaves a large bleed puddle on the arena. This stack will hit 4 times. Both light parties will begin rotating around the arena, away from Oracle Reen, taking hits from Sinbound Holy as they go. Each party must make sure that they end up as far away from Oracle Reen as they can be. As the last few puddles of Sinbound Holy are placed, Shiva Reen and Oracle Reen will begin to change their forms, with Shiva Reen having appeared at a random cardinal or intercardinal during the puddle drops. As they transform, the Shiva Reen at the wall will turn into Oracle Reen and cast a gaze on the party. The Oracle Reen that we rotated away from will become Shiva, turning the floor into ice. Be careful not to move, as the floor can easily cause you to wall yourself. The newly appeared Shiva Reen will then begin casting either Twin Stillness or Twin Silence. Twin Stillness is a cleave in front of Shiva, immediately followed up by a cleave behind her. This is indicated by her voice line or quote, where she says stillness. If Shiva instead casts Twin Silence, indicated by her quote, she will instead do a cleave in a cone behind her and then a cleave in front of her. It should be noted that for knockbacks, there is a cursed pattern. If Oracle Reen spawns at a cardinal or intercardinal that one of the light parties gets knocked back to, all players will instead rotate clockwise as fast as they can, hoping to have one group end up across from her and one group end up underneath her. The light party underneath Oracle Reen will move to be across from her once the ice floor appears, and then resolve the quotes the same way as normal. After the cleaves from Twin Stillness or Silence resolve, the ice floor will disappear and Oracle Reen will appear in the arena, targetable once again. As soon as she appears, she begins casting Hallowed Ray, a hard-hitting stack that serves as a body check for the mechanic. Reen will auto a few times before casting Mirror Mirror. This cast spawns 3 mirrors around the arena, 1 blue and 2 red. The red ones will always be 90 degrees apart from one another. As these mirrors appear, the main tank must pull Reen away from the blue mirror in order to make space for the upcoming mechanic. Reen will begin casting Scythe Kick, a donut AoE around her, and at the same time, shoot out 4 Proteans on the closest players to her. The blue mirror in the arena will copy this mechanic as it goes off. We will have the melees and tanks go with Reen while the ranged and healers go to the blue mirror. In both groups, facing the wall, we have Group 1 going left and Group 2 going right, with the supports being closer to the wall than the DPS. Both parties should be cautious and make sure not to shoot the Protean into the opposing party. Once the Donut and Proteans go off, they will be stored in the red mirrors, which will both go off at the same time after a short delay. Both groups will head to the red mirror closest to them and set up to do the same Donut and Protean combo. If the blue mirror was between both of the red mirrors, the ranged group will head clockwise, and the melee group will take the other mirror. Due to how close the mirrors are, one of the DPS players will naturally be aiming their Protean towards the other party. To fix this, they must instead shoot it directly middle, away from the other party, in order to not kill them. Immediately after the second set of mirrors, Reen will cast Banish, which will either be a spread or a 2-person stack depending on how many orbs she has on her head. It is a spread if she has 4 orbs, and a pair stack if she has 1 orb. After Banish finishes casting, Reen will teleport middle and begin casting Light Rampant. All players should quickly get into the circular arrangement shown, otherwise the upcoming mechanic may be messed up or made more difficult. After the Light Rampant cast, Reen will become untargetable and 6 players will be tethered to the adjacent players next to them. The remaining 2 players will be given an AoE telegraph. These tethers, when activated, will blow the entire party up if you are too close to the 2 players you're tethered to. The party will also be granted random stacks of Light Steeped. This is relevant later in the mechanic. However, it is important to note that if any player gains 5 stacks, they will explode and wipe the raid. As the players get their tethers and debuffs, 6 towers will spawn around the arena: north, south, northeast, northwest, southeast, and southwest. For the players with AoE indicators, 1 will need to end up at the east wall, and 1 will need to end at the west wall. These players can use their eyes to resolve this, or, if they are perfectly above and below each other, can instead move clockwise to get to their spots. 6 tethered players will be tethered forming a rough shape. If 3 of each roll is tethered, then the shape the tethers make should look like a hexagon. If it is a 2-4 split due to 2 of a roll having the AoE telegraph, look at the roll with 4 players tethered. If 4 DPS are tethered, R1 will head to the other side. But if 4 supports are tethered, T2 will head to the other side. Once you are in an arrangement where there are 3 tethered players north and 3 tethered players south, the shape should look like a clean hexagon, with a player towards north, northeast, northwest, south, southeast, and southwest. From here, in order to satisfy the tether distance requirements, while also soaking the towers, the north and south players will swap with each other, and the northeast and northwest players will also swap with each other. When each tether player reaches their tower, the tethers should create a star shape. From the wall, once their AoE indicator disappears, it will hit them 5 times total, each one dropping a large bleed puddle underneath them. They will move in towards the middle until the 3rd puddle, after which they will take a left turn, facing towards the middle, and drop the last 2 puddles. After the towers snapshot, around the 3rd puddle, the party will begin grouping up at the north or south point closest to them, and the puddle players should also end up there, for a total of 4 people in each group, north and south. The spots where the towers were soaked will begin having 3 light orbs appear in a triangle formation, and then another 3 shortly after in the remaining spots. These will do very large AoEs. One party will have 1 orb on top of them in the middle, and the other will have 2 orbs beside them. Both groups will rotate clockwise to be on the very edge of the first set of AoEs. 1 player in each group will have a light stack telegraph. The light party stacks will go off before the first orb AoE goes off, so don't move too fast here. After the first orbs go off, all players will move out of the AoE of the second set of orbs, and the tethers will fall off here as well, so all players should begin moving middle. Throughout the mechanic, all players should have been building stacks of light steeped. A tower in the middle will spawn, requiring 4 players to soak. Out of the entire party, there should only be 4 players with 2 stacks of light steeped, and 4 players with 3 stacks. Any player with 2 stacks of light steeped will stand inside the tower to soak it. Everyone else will begin getting to their clock spots for the banish cast that is about to go off after the tower is soaked. Just like the first one, it can either be a stack or a spread depending on the orbs on top of her head. If it is a stack, we have all supports sit with their DPS partner. Reen will then appear targetable again and cast the House of Light. This is a Protean on all players, and grants 1 more stack of light steeped. If anyone is given a 5th stack from this cast going off, the raid will wipe, so be especially careful not to overlap here. After a bit, Reen will begin casting Absolute Zero, which is her Enrage. If she is not below 20% HP by the time the cast snapshots, the party will wipe. Being below 20% makes it a raid-wide that requires light mitigation to survive. It is recommended for the party to default to their clock spots for this raid-wide. Reen will become untargetable and knock the party away and freeze them in place, becoming a giant ice crystal in the middle. The intermission begins with Reen in the middle, impervious to damage due to all of the light crystals sitting on cardinals and dark crystals sitting on intercardinals. In order to solve the puzzle mechanic of the fight, the party can only destroy the light crystals and will have to leave the dark crystals alive. Melees and tanks will hit the light crystal that is on their color cardinal, while healers and ranged will sit in front of the dark crystal on their color intercardinal and hit the closest light crystal clockwise. As the party bursts to kill all of the light crystals, the dark crystals will begin shooting Proteans baited on the closest players to them. The ranged and healers will bait these and step away from them throughout the mechanic. In the meantime, melees and tanks will be targeted with large AoE puddles that they must dodge while hitting their crystal. It is advised to sit max melee on one side to bait the AoE, then dodge to the other side. If your crystal dies early, start hitting other players' crystals. After the third puddle, the light crystals will begin tethering to the player closest to them. These tethers will periodically drop a lingering bleed puddle on the tethered player. This acts as a soft enrage. It should be noted that if any of the Proteans hit any crystal or the ice veil, it will be given a vulnerability down, making it almost impossible to kill in time. As soon as the last light crystal dies, the ice veil in the middle of the arena will become targetable. Ranged and healers will keep baiting their crystal Proteans while everyone attacks the veil. The party must reduce the veil to at least 50% HP in order for Gaia to successfully finish it off and avoid the enrage. While melee LB3 is available here for prog, it's recommended to save it for the next phase. Once the Veil is destroyed, a short cutscene will play out, hitting the party with raid-wide damage. Gaia will then reawaken as the Oracle of Darkness, welcoming you into the next phase.
Phase 3 starts off with Gaia casting Hell's Judgment, setting everyone's HP to 1 before teleporting middle and casting Ultimate Relativity. On the cast, she will apply a plethora of debuffs to all players and spawn a spotlight on each cardinal and anti-cardinal. There are a lot of debuffs and mechanics to explain, so we will go over them briefly. All of the following debuffs will go off when their timer expires. Darkfire 3 is a large spread AoE. This applies a fire resistance down debuff. Unholy Darkness is a large stack AoE that requires 5 players in it. If there is less than 5 players, all players hit will be granted a Mark of Mortality. Dark Blizzard 3 is a large donut AoE. Being hit by this will grant you a damage down. Return is a debuff that when expires, places down a return marker, which saves the player's position and grants the return buff. Upon expiration of return, you will be teleported to the saved position. The following debuffs will go off while you are stunned from their rewind. Dark Eruption is a small spread AoE. Shadow Eye is a gaze that will grant a doom to any player staring at you. Dark Water 3 is a small stack AoE that requires 4 players. Any less and all players will be given a Mark of Mortality. On top of all these debuffs, we also have the stoplights to deal with. When they are about to go off, they will start telegraphing a rotation before shooting a laser at the closest players to them, granting a fire resistance down debuff. This makes it so if you have a resistance down from Darkfire 3, you will die, and vice versa. After the laser goes off, it will start rotating in the direction telegraphed. 7 players will be granted a Darkfire 3 of a varying length, with a minimum of 2 DPS having a 10 seconds duration, a minimum of 2 supports with a 30 seconds duration, and 1 support in DPS being granted a 20 seconds duration. Additionally, 1 player will be granted an ice debuff with a 20 seconds timer. If it is a support with an ice debuff, there will be an extra DPS with a 30 seconds fire debuff. If there is a DPS with an ice debuff, there will be an extra support with a 10 seconds fire debuff. All players will be granted a return debuff, with all 10 seconds and 20 seconds fire having a 15 seconds timer, and all 30 seconds fire players having a 25 seconds timer. 3 players will be granted an Unholy Darkness stack debuff, one being 10 seconds, another being 20 seconds, and another being 30 seconds. Finally, all players will have a specific debuff that goes off during their rewind. These will all have 40 second timers. The players with a 30 seconds fire debuff will get a Shadow Eye Gaze debuff. The players with 10 seconds fire debuff will gain a Dark Eruption spread debuff. The DPS with a 20 seconds fire will get a Water Stack, and the support with a 20 seconds fire will get a Dark Eruption. All of these debuffs seem overwhelming, but in reality, we only have to focus on the timer of our fire debuff. This will assign us to a specific clock spot and spotlight, and we only have to move out or in depending on what our upcoming debuff is. First off, all players must orient to find New North, which is where the tethers from Gaia's cast form a Y. After orienting to New North, the positions of all the timers can now be assigned. The players with 10 seconds fire debuff will have the DPS players be Southwest and Southeast, with Ranged 1 and Ranged 2 being Southwest, and Melee 1 and Melee 2 being Southeast. If both of one pair have the same debuff, the player in Group 1 will flex for their partner. The support with 10 seconds fire or an ice debuff will take North. The players with 30 seconds fire debuff will have the support players be Northwest and Northeast, with Healer 1 and Healer 2 being Northwest, and Tank 1 and Tank 2 being Northeast. The same prio will apply for Group 1 flexing if both players in a pair have the same debuff. The DPS player with 30 seconds fire or an ice debuff will take South. The players with a 20 seconds fire debuff will have the DPS player take East. and the support player take west. With everyone having claimed their clock spot, the players with the 10 seconds fire debuff will begin ticking down, so these players will head to the wall to detonate it. The rest of the parties will stack up middle for the first Unholy Darkness. After the 10 seconds fire debuff go off, the northeast, northwest, and south stoplights will prepare to fire a baited laser. We will have the 30 seconds fire players bait these lasers here. Players baiting lasers should bait it about max melee or a bit behind their stoplight, on the side that lets it shoot towards the outer sides of the arena. They will have to make sure they do not shoot any players placing down their rewind, but not shoot so deep that it will rotate to shoot another player later. These baits will go off at the same time as the 15 seconds rewinds, so the 10 seconds fire players and the 20 seconds support players will place their rewinds underneath their stoplight. The 20 seconds DPS player will instead place their rewind underneath the boss, cheating slightly towards their clock spot. After the first set of laser goes off, all players except the 20 seconds fire debuffs will collapse dead center in the middle of the arena as the 20 seconds ice debuff will go off. This donut is small, so be careful not to be clipped by it. The 20 seconds fire players will head to the wall to detonate their AoEs. After the stack goes off, the southeast, southwest, and north stoplights will prepare to shoot an AoE. So the 10 seconds players on those clock spots will bait the lasers. And these go off at the same time as the 25 seconds rewind debuffs go off, so the 30 seconds fire players will place their rewinds middle, cheating slightly towards their clock spot. Once the lasers go off, the 30 seconds fire players will head to the wall to detonate their AoEs, while the rest of the party collapses middle for one final Unholy Darkness stack. After the stack in AoEs, the west and east stoplights will begin preparing to shoot an AoE, so the 20 seconds fire players on those clock spots will bait them. A few seconds after the final stoplight bait, all players will get stunned and return to their rewind spots. Since there are gazers coming out from the middle, all players must face in the direction that puts them facing outwards in their rewind spots. Otherwise, they will be given a doom debuff. If their rewind is done properly, the Dark Eruption spreads will go off, not killing everybody. The water stack will go off in the middle and not grant a mark of mortality, and nobody will get gazed and granted a doom. The entire mechanic has a lot going on, but we can pretty easily flowchart our mechanics. Here's a little cheat sheet for spots, courtesy of the official pastebin. Here's some extra tips for preventing wipes. When baiting their spotlights, players should try to use the little circle above their head as a guide, where the dot in the center should be directly behind the side of the stoplight you're baiting towards, and doing this will ensure it's baited properly every time. If you place your rewind in the wrong spot, such as the Dark Eruption being placed middle, you could wall yourself right before the rewind. You will die, but nobody else will, as the return debuff will disappear when you die. Gaia will follow the rewind immediately with Shell Crusher, a party stack that targets on a random player. Everyone should begin heading under the boss for this. Gaia will then cast Shockwave Pulsar, a hard-hitting raid-wide. She will then follow it up with a Black Halo, which is a 2-person tank buster. This buster is most commonly invulned or kitchen sinked with 1 tank instead. For the upcoming mechanic, Sextuple Apocalypse, we should have the party set up in the following configuration in our role groups in order to make the mechanic solve easier. After autoing for a bit, Gaia will begin casting Spell and Waiting Refrain, and then Dark Water 3. The Dark Water 3 cast will telegraph a total of 6 stack AoEs on random players, and when the cast finishes, we'll apply a Dark Water 3 debuff of varying durations to each player. There will be 2 players with a 10-second timer, 2 players with a 29-second timer, and 2 with a 38-second timer. There will always be 2 players with no debuffs. We must sort ourselves out to have 1 of each timer and a nothing player in each role party. If a role party has any duplicates, the following priority will be used for someone to flex for the other side. Tanks will flex for their healers in the support party, and melees will flex for the ranged. If both players in the same pair have the same debuffs, Group 1 will flex for Group 2. As the 10-second timer for water stacks ticks down, Gaia will begin casting Apocalypse, which will spawn a telegraph for a later mechanic. Right after the first stack goes off, she will begin casting Spirit Taker. This is an AoE that targets a random player and knocks back anyone else hit into the wall. All players must spread, with players in the melee spot heading inward and ranged players heading outward. As this goes off, the Apocalypse Telegraph will begin, which sends out 2 white orbs from the center to an opposite cardinal or intercardinal, and begin rotating, either clockwise or counterclockwise. These will telegraph 6 AoEs that will go off around the arena. All players must note down where the lines went to, and the direction. They will head to the safe spot behind the direction the orbs are heading. The waymark that is the safe spot determines where both role parties will be going to. The party will now get back into their true role parties for the next part, with all DPS heading to be on the safe waymark that's blue or yellow, and the supports heading to the safe waymark that's red or purple. Melees and tanks will sit on their waymark that's safe, and the one offset, with Group 1 left facing in and Group 2 right facing in. The ranged and healers will sit at the wall of the waymark, spaced out by 2.5 wall notches. They'll have Group 1 left and Group 2 right facing in. Gaia will begin casting Dark Eruption, which is a spread AoE on all players. The Apocalypse AoEs will begin going off. As soon as the second Apocalypse AoE snapshots, melees and tanks will move into the middle, being careful not to overlap their spreads. Ranged and healers should follow shortly after, being quick to make sure they do not get hit by the AoEs. Now that both groups are in the middle, the next set of water stacks will go off, so the players who flexed for the first set will also flex for the second. As the stack is resolving, Gaia will begin casting Darkest Dance, a distance-based tank buster that hits incredibly hard. In order to resolve this, the tank soaking the buster must note down the waymarks where the Apocalypse dots originally traveled to. They will then count 2 waymarks away from it in order to find the safe spot they'll be looking for. After the stack goes off, they will head to one of these waymarks to bait the buster at the wall. After the buster hits, Gaia will quickly perform a knockback. All players must get into their stack groups again, the support stack being left facing the wall, and the DPS stack will be right facing the wall. The players who flexed for the previous stacks will remain in their flexed groups. After the knockback goes off, players will meet up about max melee behind Gaia to resolve the stacks. Gaia will follow up this final stack with another Shockwave Pulsar before casting Memory's End or Enrage. If she is not under 20% by the time the cast goes off, she will wipe the party.
Phase 4 starts off with Oracle Reen reappearing either north or south. She will shortly cast Materialize, which will spawn a memory crystal in the north of the arena. This crystal will be present during the entire phase and take damage from mechanics throughout. If it takes any extra damage due to individual player mechanics, it will eventually shatter, barring you from continuing to the final phase. Reen will wait a bit before transforming into her Phrase Felger form. Once she transforms, she'll drop baited AoE puddles on all players, so we'll stack up in the middle of the arena before spreading out after its snapshots. All players should head out to the following spots, either the same as our Light Rampant spots from earlier in the fight. The Memory Crystal will pulse with an Edge of Oblivion raid wide, before Gaia appears south. Both targets will now cast Darklit Dragonsong, starting the first mechanic of this phase. Since both bosses are active at the same time, we will have main tank take Reen and off tank take Gaia. On the cast, 2 players will have a stack telegraph. This applies Dark Water 3 to those players, which is a small stack that requires 4 players in it. All players will also be given 3 stacks of Light Steeped. This isn't relevant for the mechanic resolution, but it means if you get doubled up by anything that grants it, then you will explode the party due to reaching 5 stacks. 4 players will be tethered to each other after the cast goes off. These are similar to the Light Rampant tethers, but will instead snap if players get too far or too close to each other. This always targets 1 healer, 1 tank, and 2 random DPS. They will be shown on players but not activate until later. The 2 players with the stack will always have 1 player with a tether and 1 player who doesn't. First, let's take a look at what the tethered players have to do. All players need to sort themselves out to eventually resolve into a bow tie shape. On the initial lineup, we'll have a healer be the northwest player, the tank be the northeast player, and the 2 DPS being the southwest and southeast players. If these players are already in a bow tie shape, which looks like this, then there is no change needed. If the tethered players form a box shape, then we must have the northeast and southeast players swap in order to form a bow tie. If the tethered players form an hourglass shape, then we must have the northeast and southwest players swap over to form a bow tie shape. After the swap happens, 2 player towers will spawn on north and south. These will be soaked by the tether players, which will grant them 1 stack of Light Steeped each. They should be careful to stay as middle to the tower as possible in order to not interact with the AoEs baited by the non-tethered players. The tethers will become active before the tower snapshot, so make sure you swap in time. Now, we may focus on what the non-tethered players are doing. The players who aren't tethered will have the healer go northwest, the tank go northeast, the melee goes southeast, and the range goes southwest. If 2 DPS of the same role are not tethered, Group 1 will flex for them and head to the other side. The non-tethered players must watch if the tethered player with the stack is either north or south, even after any swaps go out. If a water stack is on the same north or south side as them, then the stack must swap to be on the opposite north or south side. The other untethered player next to them must also swap in order to keep the sides even. As the towers spawn, Reen will begin casting Path of Light, which will bait 4 Proteans onto the closest players to her, and each grant 1 stack of Light Steeped. The non-tethered players must bait these, so they will stay close to Reen. They should bait the Proteans to shoot between the 2 waymarks they're close to, away from the towers on north and south. The Proteans will go off, and the towers will resolve. The tethers are still active here, so watch out. Gaia will begin casting Spirit Taker, an AoE on a random player, like from APOC. All players should note down if their current positions have them on the north half or the south half of the room. The following spreads will be used for Spirit Taker. The untethered support on the west side will go to the west wall. The west DPS will head to the D waymark. The untethered support on the east side will sit on the B waymark, and the DPS will sit in the center of the arena underneath Reen. For the tether players, they will head to the inner card marker closest to them. As the Spirit Taker goes off, Reen will begin casting Hollowed Wings, telegraphing to cleave one half of the room either east or west. The Dark Water 3 debuffs will begin ticking down. All players must now head to the safe half of the arena away from the Hollowed Wings AoE. They'll group back up into their north and south groups to soak the stack. The stack player north should try to cheat away from the memory crystal a bit in order to not clip it with the stack. At this point, the tethers will have fallen off. Shortly after the stack goes off, Gaia will begin casting Somber Dance. This is a distance-baited tank buster, followed up by a proximity-baited tank buster. The tank that is involving this will head out to the wall away from Gaia to bait the far hit, before moving into her hitbox to take the close hit. All players should stay out of her hitbox after she jumps in order to not be clipped by the near buster. The mechanic will be finished with another Edge of Oblivion, before Reen and Gaia teleport middle to begin casting Morn. Both bosses will target their respective highest end aggro with a light stack from Reen and a dark stack from Gaia. Being hit with a stack will grant a debuff, which will kill you if you take damage from the opposite stack. This will hit 4 times in total. It is standard to take this 7-1, with one tank heading out to solo a stack, and the other tank taking it in the middle with the party. The tank soloing the stack needs a lot of mitt and help from the other tank. Tanks should communicate who goes out for this Morn, and the second one at the end of the phase. After the 4th hit, Reen and Gaia will begin casting Morn Afa. This is one more hit that's a full party stack. However, the trick here is that the damage will become lethal if both bosses are not within 5% HP of each other. The boss that is higher will either be shown by a yellow tether if Reen is higher, or a purple tether if Gaia is higher. In the instance that it's impossible to level out their HP in time, it's important to note that the stack will go off on the player with the highest enmity on Reen, so the tank with her aggro can leave the stack in order to sacrifice their life for the rest of the party. Before heading to the next mechanic, here are some tips and an alternative for Morn you can do. Warning, however, the following strats are not PF standard. These are just for recovery or for extra safety. If tank mitts get messed up and invuln is not available to be used on the Somber Dance buster, tanks can instead share this buster. Tanks should communicate who's taking first and second hit. One tank will head to the wall to bait the distance jump from Gaia, and the other tank will head into her hitbox to bait the proximity jump from her. Since you need to mitigate Morn anyway, tanks can press Rampart or other 20 seconds long mitigation toward the end of the Somber Dance cast bar. This combined with your short mitt should be enough to mitigate Somber Dance, and may last into the Morns. Speaking of Morn, a possible alternative to 7-1 is available for coordinated tanks to choose if they wish. This is 6-2 Morn. Please note that since this is not PF standard, communicate with your party that you are doing 6-2. Setting this up requires a bit more work from the start of the phase. At the beginning of phase 4, while only Reen is targetable, both tanks should have their stance on and build up as much aggro as possible. Once the Akirais appear, the baited puddles on the floor, they'll turn their stance off for the rest of the phase. This ensures that both tanks have the highest aggro on Reen, but none on Gaia. Since they won't be generating aggro, a random DPS should have aggro on Gaia. This isn't a problem since Gaia doesn't auto throughout the entire phase. Then, when it comes to Morns, the tanks will take the stack from Reen as a pair. and one of the DPS will be taking a stack from Gaia with the rest of the party. Some groups may do this in order to prevent certain wipe states involving tank deaths. After Morn finishes, both bosses will teleport middle and begin casting Crystallize Time. This is a hard-hitting raid-wide which starts the final mechanic of this phase. On the cast, players will be granted debuffs from Ultimate Relativity along with some new debuffs as well. Wormclaw is a debuff with a red icon. This debuff will kill you if you do not cleanse it. Cleansing it is done by popping a dragon head in the arena, which releases a large AoE around the player and drops a small candy. Wormfang is a debuff with a blue icon. This debuff will kill you if you do not cleanse it. Cleansing it is done by picking up a candy in the arena, which is dropped by a Wormclaw player popping their dragon. Now for some repeating debuffs from earlier that you may not remember. Dark Water 3 is a stack requiring 4 players. Unholy Darkness is a stack requiring 5 players. Dark Blizzard 3 is a large donut AoE around the player. Dark Eruption is a spread AoE around the player. We also have a couple new debuffs. Dark Arrow 3 is a large AoE around the debuff holder that will knock back any players hit by it across the arena once it expires. The player with Dark Arrow 3 will not be knocked back by their own AoE. Quietus is just a minor raid-wide when it expires, but it will have 3 going off at the same time. Now that we know what all the debuffs do, let's look at how they show up. 4 players will be granted Wormclaw, a red debuff. 2 of these players will be given a short 16 seconds timer, and the other 2 a longer 40-second timer. The players with the short timer will also be granted a Blizzard debuff with a 13 seconds timer, and a player with the long timer will be granted an Arrow debuff with a 13 seconds timer. The other 4 players will be granted Wormfang, the blue debuff. All of these are 40 seconds timer. One of these players will be granted a Dark Eruption, an Unholy Darkness, a Dark Water, and a Blizzard. All players will be granted a Rewind debuff with 32 seconds. If you remember this from Ultimate Relativity, it places a return marker on your position which will teleport you back there during a rewind stun. Finally, 3 random players are granted a Quietus debuff with a 30-second timer. On the arena, 6 stoplights will spawn, being north, northeast, northwest, south, southeast, and southwest. They will be tethered to by the same tethers in Ultimate Relativity, which shows the order in which they go off, the yellows being the first, and the purples being the last. Instead of shooting lasers, however, these will do large circle AoEs around them when they go off, which we must avoid throughout the mechanic. 2 dragon heads will also spawn north. These do a lap around the entire arena, doing a full 360. They must be popped twice in order to kill them. If they are not gone by the time they complete the lap, they will wipe the entire raid. Now that we know what everything does, we will set ourselves up in the proper positions. Firstly, we must note down which stoplights are tethered to be purple. The north and south ones are always yellow, but it can be either northeast and southwest that are purple, or northwest and southeast that are purple. The blue debuff players will begin heading to the purple tethered spotlights. The Dark Eruption will head to the north spotlight that's purple, while the Unholy Darkness, the Dark Water, and Dark Blizzard players will head to the south purple spotlight. They will sit where the circle intersections are, leaning away from north or south. The Dark Eruption will be planting in this spot until the yellow stack goes off. The red ice players must sort themselves to have 1 on west and 1 on east. Supports will prioritize west, while DPS will prioritize east. These players will use the same priority from APOC in order to flex. If there are 2 supports or 2 DPS with the same debuff, tanks will flex for healers and melees will flex for range. If it's 2 of the same role, Group 1 will flex for Group 2. Ice players will sit on this ring on the floor, which shows the path of the dragon heads, or about right beyond the waymark. The arrow players will use the same priority to sort themselves southwest and southeast, with supports prioritizing southwest and DPS prioritizing southeast. These players will stand at the wall in between where the circles on the floor intersect, cheating away from south. In our proper spots, the mechanics will begin resolving. Another Edge of Oblivion raid-wide will go off. The north and south spotlights will now go off first, releasing a large AoE. They'll now head to the intersection of the 2 circles and sit there. At the same time, all players on the southeast or southwest side will have a water stack go off shortly after. All players should now get in position for the ice and arrow debuffs going off. The arrow players will stay at the wall, while the rest of the southern blue players will sit in front of the arrow they're stacked on in order to be knocked to the other side of the arena. Since a Blizzard Donut goes off at the same time, they should be tightly packed in order to not clip anyone with it. The Dark Eruption player on the north inner card will go off at the same time as the rest of these players. This player must be sure not to move too close to the crystal or else they'll clip it and damage it. At the same time these debuffs go off, the East and West Red players will pop their Dragon Head and immediately move, preparing for the next set of stoplights going off. The Red Ice player on the side, the north inner card stoplight being purple, will head to join the rest of the group there, as they all get knocked to there. The Red Ice on the side with the south inner card stoplight being purple will instead head to the edge of the circle on the floor in order to dodge it before heading north. After the knockbacks, all blue players and the Red Ice player on the safe side will begin to group up to soak the yellow stack. Players should make sure not to be too close to the crystal, otherwise you may damage it. Meanwhile, after their arrow debuff goes off, the arrow players will head to sit south, safe from all the stoplight AoEs. Once the second stoplight AoE goes off, these arrow players will move in toward the middle at southwest or southeast in order to bait their dragon heads. It is important for them to let the dragon head run into them, instead of running into the dragon, as doing this will make the pops consistent. Green will either appear at east or west and start casting Tidal Light. This is a large line AoE taking up a quarter of the arena. It'll pulse 4 times until it reaches the other side. Players should note down where she casts this first Tidal Light, as she's placing a rewind here that will be repeated later. At this point, all players will begin heading north, with the arrow players heading south to dodge the final set of stoplights. After the final stoplight goes off, blue players will begin heading to pick up their cleanse. The blue player with the Unholy Darkness will pick up the candy on east. The player with Dark Eruption will pick up the candy on west. The player with Dark Water will pick up the candy on southeast, and the player with Blizzard will pick up the candy on southwest. They must do all this while dodging the remaining Tidal Light AoEs from Reen. She'll teleport north or south to cast another set of AoEs. This will also place down another rewind, and we'll now know where to go to place our own rewinds. After picking up the cleanses, all players must start heading to the inner card in between where Reen teleported to for both Tidal Lights. In this example, she started east and then went north. All players should head to northeast to place their rewinds. Looking at the wall, we have Group 1 left and Group 2 right, with tanks being in front of both light parties. It's important to be careful where you place your rewind, as there are 2 wild charge knockbacks going off during the stun, which can kill you if you get knocked into the wall. Right before they snapshot, the quietest debuffs will fall off, dealing light raid-wide damage to the entire party. After the rewinds are placed, Gaia will begin casting Spirit Taker, and Reen will begin casting Hollowed Wings. The tanks will head to the wall in front of where they place their rewinds. The healers will back up a bit, and all DPS will spread away from their rewinds. Players must be careful not to spread on top of the crystal, as the Spirit Taker will destroy it. After the Spirit Taker, the rewinds will stun everyone and teleport them back to where they were placed. Reen's Hollowed Wings will go off during the stun. This is a knockback originating from Reen. The closest player to her will take a Wild Charge Buster, which must be soaked by the tank. On top of that, the closest 4 players, including the tank, will receive a Magic Vuln, which will do substantially higher damage if they are the closest again. She will then teleport to do a second Hollowed Wings on top of where her other rewind was, which should hit the other tank. If everything is set up properly, no one will die, and tanks will not die if they mitigate their rewind properly. After the rewind's finished, Reen and Gaia will appear targetable for a final Morn. This is done as a 7-1 stack as well, so the tank soloing one of the stacks should mitigate it. Right before the final hit, the Memory Crystal will do one final Edge of Oblivion, so make sure to account for the extra damage. After this final Morn, Reen and Gaia will begin casting their Enrage, Absolute Zero and Memory's End. If they are not zeroed out before the time it goes off, the raid will wipe. Killing them will begin a cutscene, which will welcome you to the final phase as long as the Memory Crystal is still alive.
During the cutscene, there are a few reminders that need to be established before the phase officially begins. Tanks should communicate to each other, as well as both healers, their invuln and kitchen sink order for each Wings of Dark and Light, as well as who will be using Tank LB3 during Pandora's box later on. Try to follow the Tank LB3 prio as shown. Melees should communicate to each other, who will cast Melee LB3 at the very end of the phase. With these reminders out of the way, let's begin Phase 5. Welcome to Phase 5, Pandora. Pandora will auto both the first and second in aggro throughout the phase, so both tanks should have tank stance on, and the main tank should provoke as soon as possible at the start for safety. Pandora will auto attack twice before casting Fulgent Blade, a hard-hitting raid-wide requiring mitigation that spawns 6 light and dark alternating lines around the arena, forming 3 crosses. These lines can only ever spawn in one pattern, with the orientation of said pattern being random. To start, players should identify the orientation of the lines by turning their camera to face where they form what appears to be a canopy shape in the area where they all intersect with each other, indicated by 4 triangles. After a brief delay, the leftmost or rightmost cross will begin to widen before telegraphing an X-Align AoE set that will travel across the arena, with each cross going off in a clockwise order if left, or counterclockwise order if right. Should a player be hit by these lines, they will receive a damage down debuff, as well as a light or dark vulnerability up debuff, making any future instance of damage from the matching element lethal. There are 2 different movement methods to consider when dodging these X-Aligns. Regardless of which method you use, we want to always remember to wait until the X-Aligns pulse 2 times before immediately dodging into the diamond-shaped intersection that they form. Let's go over these 2 dodge methods. The first method, the Zenith dodge, is recommended for healers and casters as it minimizes movement. Start by finding where the X-Aligns intersect and form a diamond shape, and take mental note of our starting cross, leftmost or rightmost. Stand slightly away from the starting cross and wait until the X-Aligns pulse 2 times. As soon as the X-Aligns pulse the second time, immediately dodge into the left tip of the diamond and plant if the X is started left, or the right tip of the diamond and plant if the X is started right. This part of the diamond will be where we dodge for the next set as well. Turn your camera to face the next set of X-Aligns approaching and simply dodge the exact same way as we did for the first set. Immediately dodge upon the second pulse, left or right tip of the diamond and plant. Turn your camera to face the final X-Align set, and once more, repeat the same dodge, but do not worry about which part of the diamond we're dodging toward on this set. The entire diamond intersection is safe, since there are no more X-Align sets to dodge. Sprint is available to be used for every single set of X-Aligns in Phase 5, so do not be afraid to press Sprint if it can help you. Pandora will auto-attack the top 2 in aggro throughout the duration of X-Aligns, so tanks be sure to use short mitigation here. Whichever tank is using invuln first in this phase may safely use all of their personal mitigation to help with the autos. The second method, the intersection dodge, is slightly more precise to identify and execute, but is recommended for tanks to keep the boss facing more centered at the party for safety. First, start by finding the inner line intersection of the second hit. This intersection is also the point of the diamond we mentioned earlier that is facing closest to the party, and all of the X-lines will be dodged around the point of this intersection. After dodging just past the point of the intersection, turn your camera to face the next oncoming set. Wait for one X-line pulse, then take a small step back away from the oncoming X-line set. Once that next X-line has pulsed a second time, you can immediately dodge just past the point of the intersection as before. Turn your camera to face the final oncoming set and repeat the same steps as before. At the end of the second X-line dodge, Pandora will cast Morn, an AoE that targets one random player on each side of her hitbox, a light aspected AoE on her left, and a dark aspected AoE on her right. Morn inflicts high split damage, which should be mitigated and taken by 4 players each. After the third and final X-line dodge, using Pandora's front-facing hitbox arrow, Group 1 should move left, and Group 2 should move right, facing the boss. Ensure each group is positioned on each half of her hitbox and grouped tightly together to prevent anyone in the 4-person groups from being missed by the split damage. If anyone was hit by an X-line, they will die to Morn should the aspected light or dark AoE match the vulnerability they received. The main tank making sure the boss is as centered as possible is important, as X-lines are still lingering while Morn is casting. Players should move carefully to their respective sides and pay attention to Pandora's facing in case she is not ideally centered, as one group may need to move farther and faster to their corresponding side. Beware that if no players are present on one of Pandora's sides, she will randomly target a player for her other aspected AoE, which can cause an overlap and a wipe. After Morn resolves, the main tank should always provoke to establish top aggro. Pandora will auto one time before casting Paradise Regained, sequentially spawning 3 2-person towers true northwest, northeast, and south on her hitbox ring. The tower spawn order is random, and each tower will resolve in the same order they spawned in. Each 2-person tower soak will inflict minor damage, and a magic vulnerability up for 7 seconds, making more than one tower soak inflict lethal damage. To handle this, the first tower to spawn in will always become the new relative south. The entire party should position themselves near this tower and face the boss in preparation for the upcoming towers and tank busters. After the first tower appears, Pandora will begin casting Wings of Dark and Light, a hard-hitting, 2-part, dual tank buster that tanks must heavily mitigate and swap in between, while the rest of the party resolves the towers from Paradise Regained. Wings of Dark and Light begins with Pandora's light or dark wing glowing first, followed by the opposite wing. This order will determine how tanks must position themselves for each buster to avoid hitting the rest of the party. If Pandora's Darkwing is glowing first, she will face the player with the highest aggro when she started the cast, and perform a dark aspected physical tank buster cleave that covers her entire right side, plus a 45-degree cleave on her front left. At the same time, Pandora will target the closest player who is not the highest aggro at the start of the cast with a medium-sized, dark aspected magical AoE tank buster indicated by a purple tether. Pandora will then follow up with her light aspected tank busters. If Pandora's Lightwing is glowing first, she will face the player with the highest aggro when she started the cast, and perform a light aspected physical tank buster cleave that covers her entire left side, plus a 45-degree cleave on her front right. At the same time, Pandora will target the farthest player who is not the highest aggro at the start of the cast with a medium-sized, light-aspected magical AoE tank buster indicated by a white tether. Pandora will then follow up with her dark-aspected tank busters. Tanks should start by identifying whether the light or the dark wing glowed first. A very useful method for the tanks to remember the upcoming positioning is repeating to yourself, dark left, light right. If dark is first, the main tank should stand in the middle of the relative northwest tower, and the off tank directly under Pandora near the center of the arena to bait the purple tether. The healers should stand inside the relative south tower and just outside of Pandora's hitbox, the Group 1 DPS standing to the left, and Group 2 DPS standing to the right just outside of both the tower and the hitbox. Once the Dark Cleave and AoE tank busters have resolved, the main tank should move relative north and bait the white tether at max melee, and the off tank should move relative southwest for the cleave, positioning on the edge of Pandora's hitbox directly across from the relative northeast tower. The off tank can use the line on the floor as a reference on where to stand across from the tower. The healers should move relative north, staying under Pandora near the center of the arena to avoid the AoE tank buster. The Group 1 DPS should move directly to the relative northwest tower, and the Group 2 DPS to the relative northeast tower. All DPS should stand on the northernmost edge of their tower to avoid being clipped by the physical tank buster cleave. If light is first, the main tank should stand in the middle of the relative northeast tower, and the off tank at max melee relative southeast to bait the white tether. The healers should stand inside the relative south tower and inside of Pandora's hitbox, with the Group 1 and Group 2 DPS standing directly under Pandora near the center of the arena. Once the cleave and AoE tank busters have resolved, the main tank should move directly under Pandora and bait the purple tether near the center of the arena, and the off tank should move forward, staying relative southeast for the cleave, being sure to position on the edge of Pandora's hitbox directly across from the relative northwest tower. Once again, the off tank can use the line on the floor shown as a reference for positioning. The healers should move relative north, staying beyond max melee from Pandora to avoid the AoE proximity tank buster. The Group 1 DPS should move directly to the relative northwest tower, and the Group 2 DPS to the relative northeast tower. Again, all DPS should stand on the northernmost edge of their tower to avoid being clipped by the physical tank buster cleave. Wait for the remaining cleave and AoE tank busters to resolve, as well as each of the remaining towers before making any additional movements. As a small note for the tanks, the off tank should provoke Pandora as soon as the Wings of Dark and Light cast bar appears for safety, as the first target, the main tank, is already locked in at the start of the cast. The kitchen sinking tank should press all of their 10-second and short mitigation at around the halfway point of the Wings of Dark and Light cast bar. This timing will ensure they cover both tank buster hits. Rampart and 40% should already be active from being pressed during the Paradise Regained cast. Afterward, the off tank should keep aggro and face Pandora at the nearest cardinal, with the party staying behind Pandora. Pandora will auto-attack twice before casting Polarizing Strikes. Before the cast bar finishes, Group 1 should line up behind Pandora's hitbox on the left, and Group 2 behind Pandora's hitbox on the right. Tanks in front, followed by melees, ranged, and finally healers. At the end of the cast, Pandora will target a random player on her left with a light aspected line AoE, and a random player on her right with a dark aspected line AoE. These AoEs deal heavy magical split damage that should be mitigated and shared by 4 players each, applying a 2-second magic vulnerability up on each hit. The Wild Charge afflicts the players in front closest to Pandora with a light resistance down 2 on the left and a dark resistance down 2 on the right, making any damage from the matching element lethal for the next 16 seconds. On hit, each line AoE will remain on the ground for approximately 2 seconds before emitting an avoidable follow-up AoE in the same area as the cleave. Any players caught in this will receive a damage down, so all players should dodge directly behind Pandora. Pandora will then immediately repeat Polarizing Strikes 3 more times, with each set functioning the same as the first. In order to avoid lethal damage while still being able to stay stacked for all remaining hits of Polarizing Strikes, the players who receive light or dark resistance down must swap behind the opposite group after dodging the follow-up AoE, where they will stay for the remaining hits. The tanks will receive the first vulnerabilities, who will then swap behind the opposite group after the first stack. This is followed by melee second, ranged third, and finally healers. However, anyone can be in front for the final stack. Since Polarizing Strikes only hits 4 total times, nobody needs to swap after the final stack. At this time, the main tank should provoke Pandora to re-establish top aggro and face her away from the party. Pandora will auto-attack 1 time before slowly casting Pandora's Box, a raid-wide that inflicts lethal damage to the party, requiring a tank limit break 3 and light mitigation to survive. The tank who declared responsibility for using limit break 3 before the start of phase 5 should press limit break at the D in the Pandora's Box cast bar. Groups should always prioritize having tank limit break 3 available for phase 5. From here on out, the rest of the phase will repeat the same mechanics we saw previously. Dodge Exo lines the same as before, followed by the second Morn. Pandora will auto-attack twice this time before she casts the second Paradise Regained with Wings of Darkened Light, which will have the same random chance for Light or Dark Wing first regardless of what the first set was. Resolve this the same as before. Unlike earlier in the fight, Pandora will not auto-attack once the final Paradise Regained tower resolves. Rather, she begins casting Polarizing Strikes immediately after, so the off-tank will need to face Pandora at the closest cardinal as soon as possible, and the party must position behind Pandora quickly. Resolve Polarizing Strikes exactly as before. Pandora will cast Fulgent Blade one last time, followed by a final series of Exo-line dodges and the last Morn. Throw any spare mitigation you have left at this Morn, and be careful not to smudge into the death wall on accident. The party should begin sending the final 2-minute burst, after which Pandora will auto-attack twice before slowly casting her Enrage, Paradise Lost. Reen and Gaia will each grant the party limit break gauge at the R in the Paradise Lost cast bar, allowing a final use of limit break 3. Whichever melee communicated the use of Limit Break 3 before the start of the phase should cast Limit Break as soon as the gauge is at 3 bars. Assuming the party's Phase 5 was clean up to this point, Pandora's defeat is assured. See you at the empty, Genesis of Legends.
I'm the only one.
Our promise fades.